Trump doesn't have a limitation on his authority to make this country safe again. There's no limitation on that.
All right, as Trump begins his federal takeover of Washington, D.C., border czar Tom Homan said something that a lot of Americans are fearing right now. He said it out loud. He said Trump doesn't have a limitation on his authority. Cenk, we're gonna get into the details about what is going on in D.C. right now. But first, it doesn't get more dictatorial than that, does it?
Yeah, so if you're right wing, don't worry, I have a solution you'll like, okay? So we're gonna get that in a little bit. But what do you mean the president doesn't have any limitation on his authority? Of course he does, it's a democracy. There's divisions of power, there's Congress, he has to get bills passed to do certain things, right? There's a Supreme Court that doesn't allow him to do things that are unconstitutional. There's tons of restrictions on his authority, and there should be. That's how we should operate in a democracy. That's why these guys are dangerous when they say ridiculous things like the president has no check on his authority. No, that's a dictator you're thinking about, not the president.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier this week, Trump announced his decision to take control of the DC Metropolitan Police Department and deploy 800 National Guard members to fight crime. He said, our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not gonna take it. He's such a strong guy. So city leaders argue that crime is down, especially in the past 2 years after a sharp spike in 2023 following the pandemic. So this is from the Washington Post, it's actual data. Violent crime is down 26% compared with this time in 2024, according to DC police data. Homicides are down 12%. So breaking it down by specific violent crime categories, murders in DC peaked in 2023, but have been falling consistently ever since, tracking the pre-COVID trend in 2025. Carjackings did see a large surge in 2023, but have been falling steadily since the beginning of 2024. However, they remain more frequent than before the pandemic. Aggravated assaults remain higher in 2024 than in 2019, and sexual assault, domestic violence, and robbery also are now below pre-pandemic levels. So the big thing DC has a problem with in terms of crime, of course, is carjackings, which is mostly carried out by teenagers. But Trump is targeting Washington, DC for a reason, okay? DC is unique in a lot of ways regarding jurisdiction and representation in our government. So from the New York Times, even before the current crisis, Trump held a significant amount of control over DC. The president nominates the city's judges and top prosecutor. Much of the city council's power to make laws and plan the annual budget is also subject to congressional oversight. Trump does have the power to declare a public safety emergency and take some control over the local government and the city's police force, but he can only do that by himself for 30 days. And even that is going beyond what any other president has done before. So here's more from the New York Times. It says, in theory, Trump could go further with the approval of the Republican-controlled Congress. Lawmakers could extend the emergency, keeping the police under Trump's authority for the duration. Trump may also be able to keep the National Guard and other federal agents deployed in the city indefinitely. In California, a fraction of the Guard force that Trump had federalized is still operating under federal control months after being called up. And yes, this is something that Trump is considering. Take a look.
Your federalization of the police has a 30-day limit unless Congress acts to extend it. Are you talking to Congress about extending it, or do you believe 30 days is sufficient?
Well, if it's a national emergency, we can do it without Congress. I think the Republicans in Congress will approve this pretty much unanimously. The numbers are worse than they ever are. Don't let anyone tell you they're not. And the whole statistical charts that they made, the whole thing is a rigged deal. They said it's the best in 20 years. No, it's the worst in 20 years.
Those numbers about crime in DC are not correct. And while many in Washington say the crime level, while decreasing, is still too high, sending in the National Guard is not being welcomed, especially since they can't really do anything.
So it is relevant to note that federal agents do not have the same authority as police to arrest people for minor criminal offenses. However, he could also direct federal units to more forcefully police the city using tear gas or riot gear, armored vehicles, low-flying aircraft, and other aggressive tools and tactics. The White House had previously said that federal agents in the city would be identified in marked units and highly visible, but those restrictions are not mandated by law, and those units could quickly shift to crack down on city residents. So unlike the rest of the country, DC does not control its National Guard and can't really do much to push back against its deployment. So the most extreme and most unlikely outcome is that Mr. Trump calls on Congress to repeal the DC Home Rule Act. That would dissolve the local government and place the city directly under federal control. The city's 700,000 residents, more than the population of Vermont or Wyoming, will lose the ability to elect their mayor and local council members. Even though it's ringing alarm bells in like-minded people across the country, a lot of MAGA supporters actually love this. And that might be part of the reason, at least, why Trump is going in so hard on this particular issue.
Trump's net approval handling crime. Where was he last year? He was way underwater at minus 13 points views of term number 1. But look at where he is now. He's on the positive side of the ledger. He's on the positive side at plus 1 point. Americans view Trump far more favorably now on crime than they did a year ago. And while this polling doesn't take into account what's exactly happening in DC right now, it does take into account what happened in Los Angeles, what's happened earlier this year. And Americans, for the most part, actually view Trump favorably. Crime is one of Trump's best issues. It's one of the reasons why he wants to talk about crime, because it favors him.
It will be very interesting when you can see polling that has what's happening and rolling out right now settling in to see
if it moves
what the impact really is, because it's been a lot of messaging is what we've seen.
Cenk, I saw somebody had asked Grok, I think it was, or just ChatGPT about the crime rates in Washington, DC. And they said, yeah, it's high. And like one of the worst criminals is currently there. And it was Donald Trump that the AI was referring to. But that aside, we're already seeing right-wing media that they're saying that the left is being like so annoying about all of this. We're just overreacting. We're crying about martial law and blah, blah, blah. And we don't know what we're talking about. DC residents already have significantly less representation in government than any other state, and even less than some US territories. They are woefully ill-equipped to counter something like this, even if they wanted to. And MAGA isn't gonna complain about any of this because they already think that cities are cesspools that are overrun with gangs and terrorists. I wonder why they think that. Probably because Donald Trump tells them that. And also all of their Fox News hosts, who by the way, all live in New York City, also tell them that. I really don't know what these MAGA people think actually goes on in cities all day. In their minds, city dwellers are just living in constant fear. But I guess in DC, maybe drones are coming to just, we were just talking about Big Brother over actual American citizens. But despite what the numbers show, these Trump supporters are only ever going to hear Trump complaining about gangs. They believe it. And it's shocking the amount of freedom that these freedom-obsessed people are willing to give up just for the sake of perceived safety. That is how you roll over and take it, and that's what they're doing. So what do you think?
I think it's nuanced. So let me give both sides of this, okay? So first of all, I appreciate Donald Trump for quoting Twist's sister. We're not gonna take it. Okay, so now on the serious stuff. So is DC crime down? Yes, that's what the stats show. Do I believe that is at least halfway real? Yes, because crime is down in Philly and in many, if not almost all the major cities. The crime peaked between 2019 and 2023, and it's been heading down since. That's great news, right? Is it halfway not true in DC? Yes. There's credible news stories from credible outlets talking about how the cops and I don't know if it's just the police or if it's guided by the politicians as well, are basically lowering all the charges so it makes it seem like there's less serious crime in DC. When I say all's too big, but there is very credible reporting that they're lowering charges artificially to make the crime stats look better. Now, cops do that from time to time in all cities too, right? So then you take that into account. So the answer is somewhere in the middle. There's still too much crime in a lot of the cities. But to your point, Yaz, like that's why I say it's nuanced. Like crime was terrible in the big cities in the 1970s, going into the 80s. And then a number of changes happened, including, by the way, getting the lead out, speaking of heavy metal. And crime went down significantly in the country at large and in the major cities. So they had this, I remember when I was growing up, oh my God, if you go into New York, like Harlem, it was very racialized, right? If you go into Harlem, you're gonna die immediately. They're just gonna kill you right away, right? That kind of like demagoguery, et cetera, but it was based on a lot of crime. Right? So now the crime is much, much lower. So there's a lot of panic when it's not as justified. At the same time, there is real crime and it did go up for 4 years. And I get why people are concerned about it. I definitely get it, okay? So now if you care about the crime, but you don't want military in the streets, is there a second answer here? Yeah, of course there is. So look, they could take over DC and they did, right? So if you can take over DC, why don't you double the number of cops? So now some on the left won't like that, but the US government has like infinite money, they do for Israel, and for Israel's beloved security, we could do security here at home, right? And cops can actually do policing. Whereas the National Guard, as Katie Tur and Yaz pointed out, actually can't do policing. They're kind of useless. It's just to have military in the streets just to see, oh yeah, we're an authoritarian government, we have military in the streets. Yeah, but did you make anyone safer? No, you didn't, so what's the point? So like if you're gonna actually address crime, okay, let's have a conversation about that. That makes sense. Now, when you get to what Trump is doing, I think it's a disaster for a number of reasons. Not because I'm not worried about crime in DC, but because A, this doesn't solve the issues we just explained. B, guys, if you're on the right, you're worried about tyrannical takeover by the government, right? Now, do you think that they're going to do the tyrannical takeover under a Democratic president when you guys will all be energized and weaponized and ready to go and ready to fight? Or do you think they might do it under a Republican government so you don't even notice, and in fact, you might cheerlead for it? And they'll tell you, oh, your security's in danger. Trust us, let us have military in the streets. Let us occupy DC. We'll take away their right to vote. We'll take away all of their electoral rights, even though they're, as we pointed out, larger than a couple of states. And we'll strip them of that democracy and turn it into a military occupied zone for your safety. Just trust us. I think that's exactly how tyranny starts. And it starts by the right wing falling asleep because it's a right wing president. This isn't for your safety or security at all. And it's a power grab. Look, the current rule is 30 days and you're done. So Trump has 30 days, period. It's not negotiable. On the other hand, if he gets Congress to authorize it, and there's enough Republicans in Congress to authorize it, then that's the law. And then, well, then don't vote for Republicans if you don't want that, right? But as long as they're within the law, they can do it, even though I don't want them to do it. But if they go outside of the law, that creates another problem. And in fact, the biggest problem. Not only do you have military in the streets who look like a tin pot dictatorship, doesn't help the situation at all, but on top of that, now the president's saying, I'm above the law. Like Tom Homan said, my power cannot be checked. Well, that's just by definition not a democracy. In a democracy, the power of the president is checked by the people through the Congress, through the Supreme Court, through many different things. In a dictatorship, the power of the executive is unchecked. You're thinking of the wrong type of government. In fact, you're thinking of tyranny versus America. America is supposed to be a democracy. And this does not look like a democracy. I mean, literally, as they say, we might even strip DC of any kind of local voting and instead replace it with military rule. That's not what we signed up for. That's not America. And it doesn't keep DC any safer. So don't buy into that BS. This is exactly what tyranny looks like.
Yeah, and we also know, Cenk, that crime doesn't really subside by over policing people. You can't just stomp on a population and expect them not to fight back in some way eventually. Crime increases demonstrably as wealth gaps widen, right? More inequality means more crime, more homeless people on the streets. That's why Gotham was such a hellhole, because that billionaire jackass is just sitting in his weird mansion playing dress up and definitely just not paying his taxes and not contributing back to his community. But as far as politics go, which is what we're always playing at here, it's much easier for a president like Trump to score quick political points with his base on his likability score, just by showing that he's actually doing something, by taking some sort of acute action, even though in the long term, it's not gonna fix the problem that he says it's going to fix. Fixing inequality by giving back to the community and restructuring a city isn't as sexy as putting tanks in a street. It doesn't quite grab a headline. It's very slow moving, it's very deliberate. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of money. Putting tanks in streets or flying drones over people also takes a lot of money, but the optics are a lot better for a guy like Trump, who is trying to attract a base like his MAGA base. So that's where we're at.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.